Here are a few things most people miss about medieval warfare. The best soldiers weren't always knights in shining armor, and the most dangerous units weren't always famous. A lot of elite troops were specialists, foreign bodyguards who protected kings from betrayal, hard frontier fighters built for fast raids, and professional corps that could hold a line when everyone else panicked. Some of these units shaped major battles and even decided who stayed in power, but their names rarely show up in pop history lists. So in this video, we're looking at 5 elite medieval units you've probably never heard of, but definitely should. Number 1. The Varangian Guard. The medieval world had plenty of knights in mail shirts and, later on, full plate armor. But some of the most trusted fighters in Europe weren't even locals. In Constantinople, the Byzantine emperors kept a household unit made up largely of outsiders, the Varangian Guard. Early on, many were Scandinavians who had traveled east through river routes and trade towns. Later, especially after 1066, a lot of English warriors who'd lost their position after the Norman takeover also ended up in Byzantine service. If you're wondering why an emperor would want foreigners standing right next to him, the answer is very practical: palace politics. A local guard can get pulled into family feuds and rival factions. A foreign guard usually has fewer ties, fewer favors owed, and fewer reasons to gamble on a coup. The Varangians were paid well and placed close to the center of power. Their work wasn't glamorous most days. It was guarding gates and corridors, escorting the emperor through crowds, controlling access to the throne room, and staying alert during ceremonies where a single shove or hidden blade could change the whole government. Because they were part of the imperial household, they could also be used inside the capital as a last resort security force when unrest flared or when a new ruler needed the palace locked down fast. On campaign, the Varangians functioned as heavy infantry built for close combat and for holding key points. Chroniclers often connect them with big axes, and that image isn't random, but don't think of it as a one-weapon gimmick. What matters is that they were equipped to fight up close, with shields and strong protection for the time, and trained to stay together under pressure. In medieval battles, discipline is a weapon. A solid block of infantry that doesn't break can ruin an enemy plan, especially in moments when cavalry is trying to punch through and everyone's nerves are stretched. Another detail people miss is how much this unit changed over time. The Middle Ages aren't one single era. They're centuries of change. In different periods, the Varangian Guard drew from different pools of recruits, worked alongside different kinds of troops, and fought under different strategic needs. The consistent part is the role: close protection for the emperor and a reliable shock force when things got messy. In a world where life of a knight stories get most of the attention, the Varangians show a different kind of elite soldier, less about status, more about trust, discipline, and being the last line that holds. Number 2, Almogavars of Aragon. If the Varangians feel like a palace unit that also fought in major battles, the Almogavars are a battlefield unit that earned a reputation so strong it turned into a label people remembered for centuries. They came from frontier zones tied to the crown of Aragon, especially areas where borders shifted and small-scale fighting was normal. These weren't tournament knights with expensive horses. They were tough light infantry, used to moving fast, traveling with minimal baggage, and fighting in rough terrain, where cavalry can't always use its speed or formation. Their equipment tells you what kind of work they were built for. Instead of full armor that slows you down, they focused on practical protection and weapons that fit quick attacks. Short spears, heavy javelins, a good knife, and a shield that didn't feel like a wall. They didn't need to be invincible. They needed to be in the right place, at the right time, with the ability to strike and get away. Against armored cavalry, that usually meant looking for weak points, hitting the sides of a formation, forcing knights off balance, and turning a mounted advantage into a close, crowded fight where heavy gear is less helpful. In medieval warfare, that can be more valuable than a perfect duel. Raids, ambushes, scouting, and pressure on supply lines decide whether an army can even stay in the field. The Almogavars were also known for coordinated intimidation. Sources describe them making noise with weapons and shouting a famous call that roughly translates as "Wake up, iron." That wasn't theater. It was communication and psychological pressure. When a unit announces itself like that, it's saying, "We're organized, we're confident, and we're coming in fast." In the Dark Ages and later medieval periods, where rumor and fear can spread faster than orders, a clear, aggressive signal can shake an opponent before the first clash even starts. What really makes the Almogavars stand out is how far their reputation traveled. In the early 1300s, large groups of these fighters served as mercenaries around the Mediterranean. They weren't just local border troops anymore. They became export-quality soldiers, hired because they had a style that worked in the politics of the era. City-states and emperors often wanted results without relying on local rivals, and a hard, mobile infantry force could do a lot of damage in a short time. When you read medieval battles and campaigns, you'll notice how often elite really means useful in hard-to-control situations, and the Almogavars fit that perfectly. Fast movement, harsh discipline, and a way of fighting that made the enemy feel unsafe even when no big battle was happening. They also push back against the simple stereotype of medieval battles as slow lines meeting in open fields. Yes, there were big set-piece battles, but a huge amount of war in the Middle Ages was smaller, faster, and strategically nasty. You're trying to make the enemy unable to move, unable to feed troops, unable to trust the roads. Almogavars were built for that reality, and that's why commanders who understood the job valued them. Number 3. Hungary's Black Army. By the late Middle Ages, some rulers start building something that looks more like a professional military. Instead of relying only on feudal duty, nobles showing up for a limited time with their own men, these rulers paid soldiers to stay ready. One of the clearest European examples is the so-called Black Army of Hungary, tied to King Matthias Corvinus in the second half of the 1400s. The name itself feels different from typical medieval units, and the structure was different too. This wasn't a one-season force. It was meant to be available, trained, and deployable when the king needed it. The Black Army was a mix of professionals and mercenaries from across Central and Eastern Europe. That variety mattered. When you recruit widely, you can pull in specialists, experienced cavalry, disciplined infantry, skilled engineers and gunners, without being trapped by local shortages. The real engine, though, was money and administration. Regular pay changes behavior. If soldiers expect wages, commanders can enforce rules, demand drills, and punish looting more seriously, because the army isn't living off the land as its main plan. That's how you get a unit that behaves like an elite force instead of a temporary crowd with weapons. This is also a time when medieval soldiers are dealing with old and new technology at the same time. Heavy cavalry still plays a big role, but infantry is becoming more important, and gunpowder weapons show up more often. Early handguns and small cannons weren't miracle devices. They were slow, loud, and not always reliable. But with training and numbers, they change how armored combat works. Commanders also leaned more on field defenses, ditches, stakes, and quick earthworks, because even a small barrier can disrupt a charge and give missile troops time to work. If a commander can put handgunners, crossbowmen, pike troops, and cavalry into one coordinated plan, the enemy can't respond with just one night solution. The results were serious. Under Matthias, Hungary projected power into neighboring regions, including campaigns connected to Bohemia and Austria. Matthias captured Vienna in 1485 and ruled from there for a time, which is a big signal of how far Hungarian strength reached in that period. That kind of sustained success isn't just about bravery. It's about logistics, discipline, and the ability to keep soldiers in the field. A medieval army that can stay together longer than its opponent often wins without needing a single perfect battle. The famous Black nickname has a few explanations in later tradition: dark armor, dark banners, or simply a label that caught on afterward. The exact origin is unclear, which happens a lot with medieval names, but the core story is clear. This was one of the most effective paid forces in late medieval Europe, and the ending matters too. After Matthias died in 1490, funding and political support weakened, and the army broke apart. It's a reminder that elite units are often tied to a ruler who can keep the money flowing and the structure intact. When that disappears, even a strong medieval army can fall apart fast. Number 4. France's Scottish Guard. Kings in the Middle Ages didn't just fear enemies on the battlefield. They feared assassins, sudden riots, and ambitious nobles who could turn into enemies overnight. That's why foreign guards appear again and again across Europe. In France, one of the most interesting examples is the Garde Écossais, the Scottish Guard, connected to the long partnership between France and Scotland, often called the Old Alliance. Scottish soldiers served in France in different waves, especially during the 100 Years' War, when France needed allies and experienced fighters. In French records, you'll sometimes see them described as Scottish archers, but the key point is their household status and their proximity to the king, not a single weapon. The job of a bodyguard unit isn't to win every battle by itself. It's to keep the ruler alive and in control in moments when everything is confusing. That means guarding doors, escorting the king through crowds, controlling who gets close, and staying calm when rumors start flying. It also means being ready to fight in tight spaces, not just in open fields. In medieval army terms, that kind of work is hard. It requires discipline, quick reactions, and a chain of command that holds up under stress. That's why a king's guard can be elite, even if it isn't the biggest unit in the kingdom. The Scottish Guard also benefited from being outsiders in French internal politics. A local noble family might be tempted to use its access for leverage. A foreign guard, especially one tied to a long-standing alliance, is less likely to play those games. That's the same logic you saw with the Varangians in Byzantium. Of course, over generations, Scots in France built connections and became part of French military life. But the core idea stayed. The king wanted a close protection unit he could trust even when powerful people around him were angry, nervous, or looking for an opening. In equipment, these guards were closer to elite men-at-arms than to exotic specialists. Picture high-quality armor for the period, well-kept weapons, and a strong emphasis on readiness. Depending on the situation, they could serve mounted or on foot. The details shifted across decades because the 100 Years' War era isn't the same as the late 1400s, but the purpose stayed consistent. Be close, be reliable, and react fast. That's not as flashy as a medieval battle documentary focused on knights crashing together, but it's the kind of role that quietly decides whether a government survives a crisis. It's also worth noting how this unit reflects diplomacy. The Scottish Guard wasn't just a military choice, it was a living symbol of an alliance, visible in courts and ceremonies. Medieval politics used symbols constantly: banners, orders, oaths, marriage ties. And a foreign guard standing by the king made a statement. Alliances are real, and they're backed by armed trust. Number 5. Genoese Crossbow Corps. By the 1200s and 1300s, if a European ruler wanted top-tier missile troops, one name kept showing up: Genoa. The Genoese crossbowmen weren't just people who happened to own crossbows. They came out of a city-state that understood contracts, discipline, and reputation. Genoa was a major trading and naval power, and it treated war in a business-like way. You pay for skill, you protect your investment, and you expect performance. That attitude shaped how these crossbow units were trained, equipped, and hired. The crossbow itself is easy to misunderstand if you've only seen it in fiction. A strong crossbow can deliver serious force, and because it's held at full draw mechanically, the shooter can aim without exhausting their arms the way a bowman does while holding a heavy draw. The trade-off is speed. Reloading takes time, especially with powerful designs that require a belt hook, a lever device, or a windlass. And crossbow skill isn't just aiming, it's keeping the mechanism working, protecting the string from moisture, and reloading smoothly under stress so the whole line stays coordinated. That's why the classic Genoese method relied on teamwork and protection. Many accounts describe them using large shields called pavises, which could be planted or held to create cover while shooters reloaded. That combination of weapon, protection, and drill is what made them elite. Medieval armies often had uneven quality. One town militia might be solid, another might barely be trained. A hired Genoese crossbow unit was expected to arrive prepared, operate under a clear chain of command, and deliver a repeatable battlefield effect. They also forced opponents to adapt. If disciplined crossbowmen with pavises are advancing and controlling space, you can't just ride straight into it and hope for the best. You need smarter movement, better timing, and ways to disrupt their rhythm. Their service record includes both success and hard lessons. At battles like Crécy in 1346, Genoese crossbowmen are often mentioned in connection with a poor outcome. But the details matter. If troops are exhausted from marching, if their protective pavises are missing or delayed, and if weather affects equipment, even experienced soldiers can be put in a bad position. That doesn't erase their skill. It highlights how medieval warfare depends on planning and logistics as much as bravery. Elite units still need support to do their job properly. Over time, the rise of more widespread firearms and changes in armor reduced the crossbow's place as the top missile weapon. But for a long stretch of the Middle Ages, Genoese crossbowmen represented a high-end solution. Trained specialists who could be hired, transported, and plugged into an army to give it serious ranged power. In a period where wars were often decided by who could keep order, maintain supply, and apply pressure at the right moment, a dependable missile corps was a strategic advantage that rulers were willing to pay for.